Alright everyone, there was a terrorist attack yesterday in Paris, as you know, a shooting. One officer was killed, I believe 2 others were injured. Even reluctant Hollande himself, who is a socialist, doesn't like to use that term generally speaking because it may not help his party retain its power, especially in the lead up to a major election there. Even he's called it terrorism, which shows, I guess, perhaps a slight shift in how the establishment parties of Europe now are forced in many ways to operate. And here's the sort of truth behind the political aspect of what's happening in Europe. As the far right and far left grow more and more honest with people about the problems that are happening there, almost all of these people are completely Eurosceptic, or at least partially Eurosceptic. They either say, get rid of the EU, or we want to severely overhaul the EU, which won't happen, so it means scrapping the EU if you want anything accomplished, because it's incapable of change unless it's changed in the wrong direction. The establishment parties there are forced to repeatedly lie to people, or adopt the same sort of style of speaking about issues that you see among sort of the populist upstarts or nationalist movements in Europe. We saw this in the Netherlands election. The party there holding power, its leader, the leader of the Netherlands, was forced to use Wilders-style rhetoric to describe the problems with those Turkish ministers and the resulting riots that happened there days before the election happened, in order to save face, in order to save himself so that he could actually be continuing in that capacity of power. He was forced to do that. You see this now as well, I think, increasingly in France. You've even seen it in Germany. Angela Merkel will never actually ban the burqa or anything like that. That's a total lie. She loves those things. She'll never do that. But she's forced during election season to pretend that she wants to do such things. She's forced to because otherwise she loses her position. Her party loses all of its power. And that's what's happening now in the wake of this attack in Paris. Hollande wants Macron to become the next leader of France. Therefore, he has to come out, call this attack what it was, which is terrorism, when if it were an off year, and there were no potential political upheaval to avoid by saying such things, he probably wouldn't refer to it that way, especially not right after those events. He'd come out and say, oh, there was an act of violence in Paris. We mourn. Our nation stands, united behind peace and serenity, and we don't like all this chaos stuff. And he wouldn't use the term terrorism. A lot of people in the U.S. election, on the left, they shied away from talking about it too, and that was, I think, to their political detriment. And because it was on people's minds, it certainly didn't help them maintain any level of power that they had. They made no gains. In fact, they lost massively on the state level, and they lost the presidency. They failed to retake anything. They sort of flatlined, and I think that's really what people like Macron, Hollande, the Merkels, and so forth of Europe, I think that's what they're worried about right now. They're absolutely fucking terrified. I'd be terrified too if I had a job position and I had an untenable centrist establishment sort of platform to work with. And things happened that I couldn't explain away using that pro-globalist, pro-interventionism, socialism-light sort of establishment platform, or conservatism-light platform as the case may be economically. If I couldn't explain those things away, I would go rogue. To save my own neck and potentially my party's ability to keep functioning at any capacity at all, I'd say, yeah, well, we're going to have to start at least temporarily changing the language that we use in hopes that the voters won't completely crucify us. Now, I understand democracy is already beginning to fail in parts of the EU. The very idea of the EU is basically anti-democratic. By the way, I'm going to get into the use of that term in connection with socialism in my next video. It's time to talk about these so-called democratic socialists. It's time to talk about them, too. They're just a different flavor of goofball, loosely based on the establishment anyway. Even though some of them have some good ideas. Yeah, there are a few things that they're right about. Not many, though. Sort of the ever-present status of the left. They have a couple of good ideas, But those ideas never take hold because they're drowned out by silliness and insanity. But with Macron and Hollande and all these others in France, what are they looking forward to in less than a week? French election. French election will be held. Their person, Macron, is holding on to at most a 1-point lead over Le Pen on the first ballot. They'll be probably the ones moving to the second ballot. I think that they're terrified that some of the anti-EU, like the Mélenchon leftists there, will switch over and vote for Le Pen on a second ballot just because they're tired of this shit. And by the way, a little bit of advice to those far leftists in France. You're never going to have an operative far left platform anyway as long as you've got somebody like Macron in there. As long as you have a pro-EU globalist in there, both the far right and the far left are completely toothless. You don't have the ability to enact any policies at all, no matter how many voters want those policies, unless they intend to recall the government entirely. And I don't even know if France has, the French people have the ability to do that. I don't know enough about the ins and outs of that part of their political system to even know if that can happen there. But if you support Mélenchon, if you support someone who's further left and more Eurosceptic than the Macrons and the Hollandes of France, you probably should vote for Le Pen on the second ballot, even if you find her objectionable. Because by leaving the EU, suddenly the far left and far right are the main competitors. It crushes the center out of existence. That problem goes away. And you can actually have an ideological argument. If you believe that your views fundamentally are superior to the populist far right, you'll be able to speak freely, you'll be able to express yourself and compete with them on an even keel. And if you believe that you're right, well, then you should win out. Just as Le Pen and Fillon and sort of the right, they'll be wanting the same thing. But you can't have that debate if you're in the EU. A country that is subjugated in all of its sovereign action to a post-national authority will never have a dedicated far-left or far-right movement actually able to do anything, because most of the regulations on its political maneuvers will not come from within that country. That's the problem within Europe today. When people, when I see that the dude there, I already forgot his name because he's fucking boring, the dude who's running the Netherlands, when I see that his party is partnered now with the far left, I have to chuckle a little bit. Because those leftists are never going to get their way fiscally or socially because the nation is subjugated to the EU. It's like the difference between Austria actually is probably at the moment the most advanced of these nations. Now Hofer lost, and people who are like, oh yeah, out of the EU, tired of the migrant crisis, they were all like fixated on this, how bad it was. He lost to a far leftist. He lost to communism light. He didn't lose to the establishment. The establishment was nowhere to be seen. Therein lies the point. Let's have a debate in the entire world, whether it's Europe, United States, someplace in Asia. Let's have a debate over the course of our countries, but let's do so in a manner that allows them sovereignty, that allows the people, if the people of the country want to go to the left, let them go to the left. If they want to go to the right, let them go to the right. If they want more immigration, so be it. They've made that choice. It wasn't some other group of people with no ties to their culture making the decision. That's what should be happening in the world. That's the world will never have peace until that is operational. People can make their own decisions. Certainly the people of France or the Netherlands are intelligent enough to make their own decisions. Right now they don't. The EU makes the decisions, hands them down, their government simply sits there and rubber stamps them and bends over and takes it up the ass from the EU, from Brussels. That's what happens, to the point where Belgium is basically just a bureaucracy factory. That's what's happening in Europe today. When I look at France, I see the centrists time and time again now, this is not the first time it's happened, have to constantly use the same language there and elsewhere to denote problems that is traditionally, over the last few years before some of these elections, has been used by the far right or the far left, all of which are Eurosceptics. They have to at least pay lip service to the fact that there are problems. They used to ignore them, stick their head in the sand and hope that the population did the same. Problem? What problem? You're a bigot if you think that there's a problem here. You're either a commie, you're either really, really out there if you think there's a fiscal problem that can be solved with more leftism, or you're just a total bitter, bigoted Nazi if you think that there's any problem with migration, any problem with too much regulation from the EU. That's what they said. Now they can't do that anymore because the majority of the population has already fled to one of those sort of polar regions of the far left or the far right. Again, so-called. It depends on what party you're regarding. The center's dead in Europe. Good riddance, by the way. The Europeans will never be worse off for that. They'll be much better off for that. You know, hopefully they embrace the far left or the far right, again, so-called, before the actual far left or the actual far right take hold and you get something far worse. That's about all. Peace out.